Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. This is Robert Weissman from Public Citizen. You've tuned in to our press conference responding to the Trump indictments in Georgia. We're going to get going in just a minute, waiting for a few more people to join and for the queue to enter in. We'll be starting in just 1 minute. All right, we're going to get going. Thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Robert Weissman. I'm the president of Public Citizen. This is an online press briefing response to the indictments of former President Donald Trump in Georgia. We're going to hear from an awesome array of panelists today who are going to offer quick reactions, and we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A at the end. After my very brief introductory remarks, we'll go to Representative Nikema Williams of Georgia, then Norm Eisen of the Brookings Institution, Cliff Albright of Black Voters Matter, Christian Nunez of the National Organization for Women, Christina Harvey of Stand Up America, and Savante Merrick of People for the American Way. As we discussed today, we're going to be offering a range of perspectives on this historic indictment. We're going to offer a Georgian perspective because Trump's scheme was an effort to nullify the votes of Georgians and part of a history of suppressing and blocking votes of voters in Georgia. We're going to hear a legal perspective because Trump's scheme was an illegal criminal act now being criminally prosecuted appropriately. And we're going to delve into the legal ins and outs of the indictment and how the case may proceed. And we're going to offer a democracy perspective because we understand what Trump did as the gravest crime there is against an effective and thriving democracy. We understand what happened in Georgia is part of an overall scheme to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election. We understand what Trump did as, in a way, a culmination of not just 4 years, but at least a decade-long effort to subvert our democracy. But only in a way a culmination because we know that the threats to democracy epitomized, not just on January 6th, but the whole stream of activities in Georgia and around the nation, continue now with efforts to suppress votes, to sabotage elections, and to thwart the will of the American people. With that, let me turn it over to our panelists who will offer their reactions to what's going on in Georgia. Our first panelist commenter will be Representative Nikema Williams of Georgia's 5th District. She sits in the seat once held by Representative John Lewis. She understands, and we all understand, that historic role. And we've been so thrilled to see someone come in, not to fill the shoes of John Lewis, undoable, but to continue the charge for democracy and justice. Just in her second term, Representative Williams has already become a great leader in the Congress on democracy and voting rights issues, chairing the democracy or co-chairing the Democracy Task Force and the Voting Rights Caucus. And we're thrilled that she's able to join us today. Representative Williams.
Thank you so much, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Congresswoman Nikema Williams, and y'all, I proudly represent Georgia's 5th Congressional District. The Fighting Fifth, y'all, it is the cradle of the civil rights movement, and the district, as you heard Rob say, previously represented by my friend and mentor, the late Congressman John Lewis. So we fully understand what's at stake when our democracy is on the line. In Congress, I serve as the co-chair of both the Task Force for Strengthening Our Democracy and the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus. And because I fully understand the importance of getting the right people elected to office, I'm also the chairwoman of the Democratic Party of Georgia, the first Black woman to ever hold that role in our state's history. I led the state that determined the outcome of the 2020 presidential election and turned Georgia blue for the first time in 28 years. And this afternoon, I am honored to be here virtually with co-conspirators for justice, like Cliff Albright, Executive Director of Black Voters Matter, Norm Eisen, who keeps the world updated on the truth of the former president's alleged crimes, Robert Weissman, President of Public Citizen, Christina Harvey, Executive Director of Stand Up America, and Savante Marek, President of People for the American Way. I am honored to be here with you all. And while I'm always proud to work with these leaders, y'all, we are here on a dark day for our democracy. Just last night, a grand jury in Fulton County, my home, indicted Donald John Trump because he attempted to overturn the free and fair election in Georgia. Why did he do it? Y'all, it's simply because Donald Trump didn't like that he lost. Georgia Democrats and President Joe Biden campaigned on the issues that mattered to most Georgians. We ran on a campaign that promised to invest in people, and we left no voter uncontacted and made sure that everyone who could vote and wanted to vote did vote. It was a triumph of little d Democratic efforts and proof that our system can work. But for the failed former president, that wasn't good enough. Donald Trump then launched an unprecedented, egregious assault on our democracy because all he has ever cared about is protecting his own power. One of the tools he saw fit to engineer his power grab was an attempt to disenfranchise Georgia voters. But thankfully, the law stood in his path. And on Monday night, the rule of law prevailed once again in Fulton County when my district attorney, Fani Willis, secured a 41-count indictment against Donald John Trump and 18 of his lackeys. She did so after following the law where it led her and with no favoritism to any candidate or political party. So let's be clear. This is a sad day for our democracy. We should never be in a situation where a former president is criminally charged with an attempt to overturn the election. But y'all, it's an important day because Fulton County demonstrated that no one, not even a failed former president, is above the law. And we showed that in Fulton County. We apply the law equally to everyone, even those failed former presidents. Well, we're starting to hold Donald Trump accountable in courts. That can't be the end of things. We need federal legislation to protect our democracy and voting rights. Legislation like my bills, the Freedom to Vote Act and the Preventing Election Subversion Act that I introduced with my Task Force for Strengthening Democracy co-chair, Representative John Sarbanes. When we pass these bills and expand the protections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we'll come one step closer to ensuring that everyone's voice will be heard at the ballot box, no matter their zip code, no matter their bank account. But make no mistake, in the 2024 election, our democracy will once again be on the ballot. Extreme MAGA Republicans at every level of government have made it clear that they want to roll back our democratic system. But it'll be up to us to elect leaders who truly represent the people so that we can live in a country where we all strive, because the government of and by the people must include all the people. And I'll now turn it back over to Robert Weissman, President of Public Citizen.
Thanks so much, Representative Williams. Next, we'll hear from Norm Eisen, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a legal analyst on CNN. Norm?
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Congresswoman. I'm very pleased to be with all of you today, just to offer a few minutes of legal analysis on the content of this very important 98-page indictment that Fulton County DA Fani Willis and a grand jury have handed down. because Donald Trump and his co-conspirators, 19 in total, are alleged to have attempted to defraud the people of Georgia and take away the prerogative and the electors of the rightful winner of the Georgia election, Joe Biden, and instead perpetuate Donald Trump in office by purloining the electoral votes of the state. It's appropriate that a grand jury of the people of Georgia have spoken in levying these charges. The indictment includes 3 kinds of legal charges. There are election crimes violations. There are general Georgia law violations. And above all, there's Georgia RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act charges. And that is really at the heart of this indictment. The RICO charge alleges 4 basic conspiracies that happened under the RICO umbrella that profoundly affected Georgia. The first was pressuring federal and state officials from the most high and mighty down to ordinary Georgians serving as ballot counters, like Ruby and Shay, running all the way up to the famous January 3rd call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to just, quote, find 11,780 votes that did not exist. Those pressure campaigns, which also included the pressure campaign on the vice president. Second, is complemented by the false elector scheme. Those false electoral certificates, just like there's a smoking gun, that Brad Raffensperger tape, the false electoral certificates are like counterfeit money. That's a smoking gun as well. The third major conspiracy under RICO is one to obstruct justice. There are a number of perjury, false statement counts during the post-election fight, and also after the post-election fight. And that's very important because that's that kind of conduct is a hallmark of Donald Trump's activity. And by the way, if you're interested in learning more about any of this, I will tell you that I've broken all of this down in great detail at the New York Times today, where I go through all of the conspiracies, also talk about the defenses, the defendants, and much, much more. And then the fourth and final of those conspiracies, and then I'll end here by assessing the overall strength of the case, was the hacking of voting machines in Coffee County, Georgia. The DA and those ordinary Georgians sitting on that grand jury have put together a powerful and persuasive case. It's very important that this case be brought. Jack Smith brought a narrow case. He wants to get it to trial extremely fast against one defendant. Fani Willis has brought a case that is as large and as comprehensive as the attempted coup itself was, looking at that nationally, but also through the lens of Georgia. It is one of the most important cases that has been brought in the history of our country. It perfectly complements Jack Smith, and we look forward to a jury, again, of Georgians sitting and determining this case, in which I believe there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I think the proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. With that, I'll pass it back to Rob.
Thanks so much, Norm. Next, we'll hear from Cliff Albright, Executive Director of Black Voters Matter.
Thanks so much, Rob. Glad to be with you all here on this very important day, this very important week. I'm sitting in the state of Georgia where, we're used to seeing Black voters having our rights taken away. We're used to a long history of voter suppression, a long history of Jim Crow, of literacy tests, of poll taxes, and even the more recent forms of the voter suppression, Jim Crow 2.0, making it illegal for people to give out food and water, even as the state creates policies that create long lines. We're used to seeing hundreds of thousands of people, voters, purged off of lists. The state of Georgia just announced a purge just a couple of weeks ago. And so we're used to seeing all of this, but what we're not used to seeing is somebody being held accountable. Even when such suppression and such illegal acts have been exposed, we're only used to people trying to correct it moving forward, trying to pass a Voting Rights Act, but not going back and saying that the person that did the wrong must be held accountable. And so what we are hoping is that this week symbolizes a new day where somebody, even a president who is not above the law, when they do wrong and try to suppress votes and suppress Black votes in particular, that they will be held accountable. That sends an important message that in order for this democracy to be viewed as being legitimate even for the very voters that were hoping to participate, that cannot happen when people are above the law and when such actions are not prosecuted. And so we're glad to see this indictment. We're hoping that we'll see the full process of justice being carried forward. And it's only fitting that as all this is unfolding, that Black folks and Black voters at the heart of it. It's Black voters that caused the president, the twice impeached former president, to lose his mind and try to find 11,700 votes. That was Black voters that did that and that he was targeting. It's Black activists in places all across the state, including rural counties like Coffee County, which is at the heart of the effort to try to get illegal data. Organizers all throughout counties such as that have made this possible. It's Black poll workers such as Ruby Freeman that have made this possible. And of course, at the end of the day, it's a Black DA, a Black woman DA that has had the courage to bring this indictment. And so it's a good day, it's a good week, but it's just the start of seeing it come to pass that in reality, that Black voters actually matter. And with that, I'll pass it back to Rob.
Thanks so much, Cliff. Let me throw it over now to Christian Nunez, the president of the National Organization for Women.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this call today. I'm just really talking about the importance of why we're all here. And I'm just really talking about an unwavering commitment to see democracy happen in free and fair elections. I also would be remiss if I didn't talk about the people who got us to this point and their commitment to disrupt and dismantle systems of oppression and systematic discrimination that has been the tax on our democracy, and to continue to be truth tellers and calling out what we see and what is and who are the antagonizers of the injustice that we've been witnessing. And most importantly, a willingness to agitate and disrupt these systems that have been holding us back and allowing people like the former president to try to interrupt our elections and cause problems and just break these criminal laws. We know since, pretty much Donald Trump and MAGA extremists, our democracy itself has been under attack since he was really in office. And it's not been a covert attack. It's been a blatant, aggressive, violent attack filled with disinformation and for provocation for hate. And Trump's actions in 2020 election have been a totally disregard for a healthy democratic system. He has manipulated and the willingness to manipulate in elections. And in the Georgia indictment, the fourth indictment of Donald Trump, the attorney Willis really uncovered a conspiracy to steal the very foundations of our democracy, which is a free and fair elections. And we can just know we heard so many phone calls. But I think I really want to point out that this is not just the beginning of just as simple of overturning elections and what that means, but how what we've seen happen in Georgia really shows a true attempt with his white supremacist, MAGA supremacist base, has really provoked in American politics and how it's shifted to state legislators, which urging and surging in voter suppression, abortion restrictions, harsh immigration laws, and other laws, LGBTQIA rights. They've really been targeting these rights of all civil rights for all people. And our democracy has really been under attack by the voter restriction techniques to disproportionately impact young people, persons of color, the elderly, low-income individuals, Black and brown voters in these communities, which we know, and women, particularly who we know are most harshly affected. So when we are keeping women from being able to vote and on issues that matter most to them, like equal pay for work, abortion access, childcare, all these different issues, gender equality, racial justice, we know the impact it does have on a state, on our country, on the very well of our country performing and being the best democratic country it can be. These are all types of rights: voting rights, civil rights, women's rights. There are all these different things. So as we're looking at this very critical moment right now, we have to make sure that this is just one of the first efforts of reestablishing imbalance we've seen of witnessing our justice system, but we have to continue to make sure that as these court cases are going forward, that we're continuing putting the full face of accountability for all the attacks that Trump and all of the accomplishments have had. We must remain diligent, and we must have to make sure our democracy is being protected for all of us, not some of us. And once again, we need to make sure we're putting through legislation that will protect voting rights for everyone, such as the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act. This is what it means. We can't have words like equal justice under law carved on, and the Supreme Court and things like that if they have no meaning. So I just want to continue to urge us and remind us the power of the people got us here, and it will take us to where we have to go. Thank you. And back over to Rob.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Just to remind everybody, we have 2 more speakers. After that, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. Let me next throw it over to Christina Harvey, the Executive Director of Stand Up America.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christina Harvey. I'm the current Executive Director of Stand Up America, and I'm here today on behalf of our nearly 2 million members across the country who are fighting every day to protect and strengthen our democracy. But before I joined Stand Up America, I also spent nearly 8 years as the senior advisor to the New York Attorney General. In that role, I saw just how much work goes into a complex case like the one being brought by the Fulton County District Attorney, where there are multiple defendants accused of an incredible amount of wrongdoing in a vast criminal conspiracy. In carrying out that work, Fulton County DA Fani Willis and her staff have faced threats, intimidation, and downright racism coming from Donald Trump and his supporters, all while merely doing their duty as public servants to protect the will of Georgia voters and America's democracy. The 41-count indictment issued by a grand jury of everyday Georgians last night was a validation of the efforts of DA Willis and her staff, and a first step in holding Donald Trump and his allies accountable for their efforts to overturn the will of voters in a state with one of the highest percentages of Black residents in the country. DA Willis told reporters last night that she wants to try defendants together and to start trial within the next 6 months. RICO trials are legendarily long affairs, and in this case, Trump, his MAGA cronies, and 19 defendants' lawyers will do everything they can to stall and interfere in these proceedings. Now that we've gotten this far, it's vital that this case be tried before the 2024 election, not just because Donald Trump may be on the ballot, but because it's critical in a democracy to make it 100% crystal clear to election officials, candidates, party officials, and campaign staffers that attempting to steal an election is illegal and punishable by time in prison. We can't have a repeat of 2020 in 2024. Justice delayed is justice denied. Timely accountability is crucial to protect our democracy and our freedom to vote in future elections. And both of these indictments, the one that came out of Georgia last night and the one coming from the Department of Justice, are crucial steps toward achieving this goal. Stand Up America and our members will continue lifting the truth, pushing back on any efforts to interfere with or delay justice, and making sure our elected officials stand up for our democracy instead of trying to sabotage it. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. After our next speaker, we'll have time for Q&A. If you want to ask a question, use the raise your hand function and we'll be able to identify you. Next, we're going to hear from the always inspirational and incisive Savante Myrick, President of People for the American Way.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you, Congresswoman, for being here with us. Really, truly, an inspiration to be with you, who've done such a wonderful job representing the cradle of civil rights in the halls of Congress and speaking truth to power. That's exactly why this indictment is inspirational as well, because there's nothing scarier than to go up against one of the most powerful people in the world and to say, despite how rich you are, despite how many fans you may have, if you broke the law, you should be held accountable just like any other citizen. Any other person who breaks the law in Fulton County in the state of Georgia in the US should be held to the same standard. And of course, that's what we see here. And, you know, let me just say, if you're not familiar with People for the American Way, for 4 decades, we have fought for a constitution that works for all Americans, that includes the right to have a vote that counts. And what the president's true crime is here, the former president's true crime is that he was attempting to invalidate that vote for all Americans. Now, as usual, my friends and colleagues in this coalition, Christina and Christian and Cliff and Norm, have said what I intended to say better than I could. So let me just take a little point of privilege here, if I could, to say something I didn't intend to say, but is motivated by watching, frankly, a little bit too much Fox News over the last 24 hours. And that is to answer directly this kind of very bizarre whataboutism that we've been seeing. That's why I wanted to talk, you know, particularly with this media availability, to talk directly to reporters who are probably seeing this. While Hillary Clinton didn't like the election results in 2016, Stacey Abrams didn't like the election results in 2020, and therefore aren't they just the same as this president, Trump? Shouldn't they also be charged with crimes? And the fact that they weren't charged with crimes is evidence that this is a political witch hunt and not a legitimate judicial endeavor. Well, I just want to be clear that the real story gets out here. Hillary Clinton conceded the next day. Donald Trump didn't. Hillary Clinton never called a Secretary of State, not a single one of them. She didn't text them. She didn't convene dozens of hundreds of meetings and phone calls with co-conspirators in an attempt to pressure election officials. She didn't do any of that. Right? She was unhappy with the way the campaign ran. She felt like some of the tactics of the Trump campaign were unfair, but she did not do a single thing that is listed in this indictment, and neither did Stacey Abrams, and neither did anybody else in power in the Democratic Party. That is just a fact, and it's a fact that needs to be repeated when we are faced with these false assertions. And the second thing I do feel like needs to be answered is these folks saying, well, this is a slippery slope, and now any prosecutor can prosecute somebody of the opposite party if they don't like their politics. That has always been the case. That's always been one of the dangers of our system. Let's be clear here, though, that the beauty, this is the intended beauty of our justice system, is that it is not up to a prosecutor whether or not you get indicted. They can press their case as much as they want, but it is citizens of the United States, a jury of our peers, in this case, a grand jury in the state of Georgia, that gets to decide if the prosecutors make a compelling case and if they presented concrete evidence. That jury of Donald Trump's peers is why he has been indicted in Georgia, period. And to all of the right-wing conservative commentators who are claiming, well, now let's just go ahead and prosecute Barack Obama, I would only say the facts don't care about your feelings. And the facts laid out by the prosecutor in Georgia are extremely compelling, and that's why he was indicted. hard stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Savante. Let me ask my panelists to turn your cameras back on. We'll take a few questions. Let me give it first to Jeff Amy from Associated Press in Georgia.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead. You're good to go, Jeff, if you can hear me.
I'm so sorry. Can you, Representative Williams, as I'm sure that you know, the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Burt Jones, was excluded from DA Willis being able to bring charges. Do you think that his role needs to be examined and he needs to be charged?
Hi, Jeff, and thank you for joining us today. I had an opportunity to serve with our current Lieutenant Governor when I was in the state Senate, and I was one of the valid 16 electors for the state of Georgia back in December of 2020. And when I showed up to the Capitol that day, I didn't fully understand why we had a separate group of electors meeting, pretending to be the valid electors of our state. And it was even more troubling when I learned that sitting elected officials in the state of Georgia were down participating in this. And anyone who has tried to subvert our elections, who have tried to put their wishes of getting our failed president reelected in place of the will of the people, they should all be held accountable. I understand the law and exactly what happened with him not being a part of the case with DA Fani Willis, but as we know that cases are bonded out to other courts and other systems all the time. And so accountability must be held so that voters can have confidence in the system when they show up to cast their ballot. Everyone should be held accountable. No one is above the law.
Thanks so much.
Justin,
go ahead, Jeff.
I'll just add a line. Just in terms of the sufficiency of the evidence, there's more than enough to charge Lieutenant Governor Jones. The matter has been referred to the Georgia authorities who are responsible for assigning cases when there is a conflict of interest. And as a legal matter, we can expect that charges will eventually proceed against the Lieutenant Governor. For the record, yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Norm. Let's go to Camila DeShalis from the Washington Post.
Hello. Hi. Okay, I think my audio is on. Hi.
You're good.
Thank you so much for taking my question. This is for the Congresswoman. I've been talking to several Georgia poll election workers, Black women, who have been monitoring what's been happening to Shaye Moss and her mother. What's your message to them who have kind of been seeing this play out, but also feeling like that could have been one of them, and they're also working the upcoming election? And what do you say also to them talking about needing the increase of security just for their own safety?
No, thank you so much for highlighting this very critical piece of this whole puzzle. We have Georgians who show up every election cycle to work at election polls. They aren't paid a lot of money. They come because this is something that they enjoy doing, helping us uphold our democracy. And so it's important that we continue to center them in this conversation, especially knowing that one of the indictments was specific to them. Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman are both constituents of mine, and it makes me incredibly proud that they showed up that day to do their job and they're standing strong, but they should not have been subjected to being a target of a sitting president. The violence that they had, that was subjected upon them, they had to move out of their homes just to be safe. And so as we gear up for subsequent election cycles, we need to make sure that we are funding our local governments in a way to keep our poll workers safe. My bill around election subversion, to prevent election subversion, will do exactly that, making sure that our poll workers are safe, making sure that no one can show up and intimidate poll workers, because we also know, as Cliff stated earlier in his remarks, we passed a law in Georgia, SB 202, that undermines some of those protections that we want them to have at the federal government. So we need to pass federal legislation to make sure that when someone shows up just to be a part of our democratic process and work at the polls, to make sure that everyone, Democrats, Republicans, independents, and non-affiliated, I don't care who you are. It's not about partisanship for me. It's about people showing up to cast their ballot and every one of those votes being counted. And that includes making sure that our poll workers are safe. And so we are doing everything that we can on the federal level and working with our partners on the ground to make sure that we can keep everyone safe.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Thanks. Let's go next. Darren Keith Gaynor from the GRIO.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for your time. Unlike the federal criminal cases against Trump, the Fulton County case could be televised. How impactful would that be for the American public and the world, particularly as Ms. Harvey pointed out, we are entering another presidential election that will likely see Donald Trump as a candidate?
I don't know for a specific person, but I'm always happy to talk. I mean, Atlanta's the cradle of the civil rights movement. And we have a history of showing up and making sure we do the right thing, even when it's not convenient. And having cameras in the courtroom here in this Fulton County case reminds me of Mr. Lewis saying how you have to bring light to the situation, and how even in the civil rights movement, thinking back to Selma and the march and everything that was happening, it wasn't until the cameras were in place, the media put a spotlight on it, that the country began to pay attention. So we need to make sure that we continue to televise this so that the country understands what is happening and who's being held accountable.
I also say, if it's okay to just jump in, People for the American Way, folks may know, was founded by Norman Lear, who I was just with. He celebrated his 101st birthday. He's a TV producer, right? Legendary TV producer. And so we really understand that people believe what they can see on their screens. And we're living in a particularly dangerous time in our democracy where if for many of the supporters of Donald Trump, if he doesn't say it's true, they don't believe it's true. And so even if evidence is presented in a court of law, folks aren't able to see it in real time. I do think there's a danger that the American people won't appreciate the seriousness of these charges, and won't therefore accept the consequences for the criminal actions of Donald Trump. So the fact that these are televised, we at People for the American Way believe is really important.
You want to go ahead, Cliff?
Yeah, well, look, the Congresswoman pretty much, raised the issue that I wanted to play. I'm so glad that she raised the historical analogy of the importance of the Selma March being televised. Without that visibility, we may not have a Voting Rights Act to this day. For people, several of us have talked about, the legitimacy of this democracy, right? The impact that seeing this process plays out can have on people who, for good reason, have been on the fence, have been cynical about this process, been cynical about the big lie and whether or not Trump and others would be above the law. It's critically important that they have the ability to see this process through. It makes our job easier to re-engage people into this process as voters when we have that type of transparency. And so I just want to echo what everybody else has said, that we think it's very important that there's that type of visibility.
Go ahead, Norm.
We're about to enter the period in every one of these criminal cases when Donald Trump unleashes a variety of weapons, both in the court of public opinion, as well as legal arguments in the court proper. One of the big ones, and it's totally unmerited, that he's surely going to try is removal of the case to federal court. There's no grounds for it because you only get to remove if the conduct related to your official duties and an attempted coup by a failed political candidate is nowhere in the constitutional job description of a president. Part of the reason that removal battle will matter so much is if the case ends up in federal court, no TV. So keep a sharp eye out. He likely will file that motion 30 days from now or somewhere within the next 30 days. That's why the stakes are so great for that removal motion, among other reasons.
Thanks, Norm. I know we have a bunch of questions, so we'll try to move a little bit faster. Let's go to Igor from HuffPost.
Thanks for the call. I was hoping to get a reaction from the Congresswoman as something Republicans, including Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz yesterday, have been saying in response to the indictment that instead of prosecuting Trump, Democrats should just beat him at the ballot box. And secondly, I was wondering if people on the call had any if you were surprised whether somebody was in or wasn't in this indictment.
Thank you for that question. And we fully intend to be the former failed president at the ballot box. But this is about accountability. This is about our democracy and a lot bigger than any one person. This is about giving the people who show up to elect people every election cycle in our country, showing them that when they show up to cast their ballot, their votes will be counted, their voices will be heard. So this is about accountability, not one specific person. Even though a failed former president has been indicted, not one, not twice, not three, but now this is the fourth time. And accountability is what this is about. So it's not about the next election cycle and who's going to win and who's going to lose, because we fully plan to make our case, because Democrats have delivered, and we're going to remind the American people every day between now and the 2024 election of which party has delivered for them. But this case is not about the 2024 election, and it's not about preventing someone from winning or losing. It's about giving the confidence back to the American people that when they cast their ballots, their votes will be counted and they will be heard at the ballot box.
Christian, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to just add that I also feel like it's also about earning back trust with our people, because, I feel that, the vote, people have been really disenfranchised, been really disheartened. They have not really had a sense of feeling like democracy, they've seen democracy under attack and feeling like what's going to happen next, and seeing former President Donald Trump get this far and his accomplices. It's been really disheartening for a lot of people. So seeing this justice take place and seeing these indictments take place and these charges and all 18 accomplices, I think is helping restore some trust that we are going to continue to press forward so that the people do know that their vote is important and a fair election is important. So that's kind of what I was going to add. Congressman Nikema Williams touched on it toward the end, but I just wanted to put that important part about trusting and restoring trust in our communities.
Thanks so much. Let me just underscore that point as well, the point that Representative Williams made. The question of, well, why don't they just beat him at the ballot box? The answer is that has nothing to do with holding him accountable for what Donald Trump and his co-conspirators did to pursue a coup in 2020. The American people get to decide who wins the election in 2024, but the justice system must hold President Trump and his co-conspirators accountable for what they did, the gravest threat there is against democracy. We have a question from Ayanna Alexander from AP, who I think is not able to use her mic. So let me just read that. It's a two-part question asking that she'd been hearing that prosecutors and judges of color are facing more harsh vitriol from Donald Trump than others. Is that true? And why might that be? And relatedly, pointing out that Donald Trump has put out a statement this morning using the term riggers with an R, riggers, and that his supporters have taken that up and asking, what is our reaction to that use of that term? Does anyone want to take an answer to that?
I mean, I'll take a shot. I mean, this is who Donald Trump is, right? He's a racist. He's been this way all his time in public life. Even at the start of his campaign, when he first attacked Judge Curiel, I think it was, right? Attacking his ancestry. The same thing is what he's doing now, right? He's got a particular venom for Black DAs, Black judges. He's got a little venom from Jack Smith too, so that might be a little bit difference in his usual trend. But this is who he is, and he's been blatant about it. It's not even dog whistles. And so I haven't seen his posts. Obviously, I'm not on his little social media thing, but you know, I haven't seen his post, but doing things like that, you know, changing a letter, talking about shithole countries. I mean, he hasn't hidden who he is, and so we need not be surprised by it anymore. And there's going to be more of this as he posts these photos of these judges and these DAs. He knows what he's doing. He's basically setting the stage for hate crimes. He's setting the stage for political violence. That's how he ended his failed presidency, and that's how he's going to be running this campaign, because he knows that the only hope that he has of avoiding most of this jail time is to run in this election and to win that election, and that's not even guaranteed to save him from the state-based Georgia prosecution. And so Donald Trump is a racist. Like the media went for at least 3 years of his presidency afraid to say as much, but we need not hide behind it. He is a racist white nationalist, and the party that is protecting him is no longer really a political party, but the world's largest hate group.
Thanks, Cliff. Christina?
And I'll just piggyback on what Cliff just said to reiterate, not only is Donald Trump personally a racist, his entire ideology, his campaign, and his presidency were built upon a foundation of racism. He and his supporters have absolutely been infinitely more terrible to prosecutors and elected officials of color. I worked for years with Alvin Bragg as my colleague, his office next to mine, his office down the hall from me. And so I get a little bit emotional about this because I have seen how DA Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, has also been targeted by Donald Trump and by his supporters. And I think it's important for us to call out just how wrong it is.
Thanks so much. Let's take a question from Robin Kemp of the Clayton Crescent.
Women who hold elected office 3.5 more times more likely to get death threats than men who hold elected office. And women of color, it's even higher. And people feel safer threatening women who are in office than they do men. And it's very clear from Donald Trump's entire life that he feels very safe threatening women. It's very clear that that's what he's doing here in Georgia, and it's unacceptable.
Thanks, Savante. Robert, are you with us? You're good to go, Robin. All right, well, I have Robin's question in text, so I'll just read that and see if anyone has a response. The question relates to why the president of the National Republican Lawyers Association and a member of the Trump campaign were in an adjoining majority-minority Democratic county, Clayton, as the ballots were being tallied. And also, any thoughts on the Georgia Assembly passing a law to exercise oversight over district attorneys? Go ahead, Representative.
I think this all goes to what we've been saying this entire time. Donald Trump was willing to do any and everything that he could to change the results of this election. The results in Clayton County were being counted overnight. I represent Clayton County, and this is a majority district of people of color who had shown up and at numbers that people did not anticipate, not people who weren't organized on the ground, but I bet you Cliff Albright wasn't surprised because we have been talking to voters on the ground the entire time. So Republicans and Donald Trump were caught off guard when people showed up in spite of the hurdles that were put in front of them. People showed up to have their voices heard. So that's why they showed up in Clayton County, because the numbers were not adding up in their favor. And they were showing up to try and do whatever they could to change the results of this election cycle and once again silence the voice of people of color in our democracy, because it was not turning out in their way. And that is the same reason why we've seen the Georgia General Assembly, who the state Senate is led by Burt Jones, who was one of the fake electors. And that's why we've seen bills like this one to give the state the ability to come in and exercise oversight over independent district attorneys, especially the places that they're looking at, or in Clayton County and Fulton County and DeKalb County, where we are led by women of color. So we are going to make sure that we do everything that we can to continue to uplift the voices of the people and get them the access that they need and deserve to the ballot box, regardless of the hurdles that are put in front of us by Trump and his lackeys.
If I could just add on to that just real quick, I know we got some other questions, but it's such an important question, right? Because people are going to celebrate, some people are going to celebrate this indictment as a victory for democracy, right? And we've got to be very clear that the threats to this democracy and the threats to Black communities and Black voters in particular are still ongoing. Yes, Donald Trump and the Republican Party tried to overturn the election, but that ability to remove prosecutors and DAs, there's more than one way to overturn an election. And what the state of Georgia, as well as the state of Florida, is demonstrating is that one way of overturning elections is to say, you know what, even though a community came out and voted for a DA, voted for a judge, voted for a mayor even, we can still overturn that. We can remove them from office. Or like in Augusta, Georgia, where a young Black DA won, and so they literally changed the judicial circuit. Or in Jackson, Mississippi, where they are creating a whole new circuit in order to take power away from officials that Black voters voted for in Jackson and Hinds County. There's more than one way to overturn an election. And if we get confused that what Trump did is the only way and that dealing with that is the only thing that we need to do, then we are going to lose sight and we're going to fail to keep our eyes on the prize. Congresswoman Williams mentioned her legislation. We've got the Freedom to Vote Act. We've got the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that's going to be reintroduced. There's still a lot that needs to be done to get this democracy closer to where it's going to be. But the threat of removing people from office and preemption, or as we're seeing here in Atlanta with Cop City, where you're seeing attacks on the very element of direct democracy in the form of ballot initiatives, all of these are efforts to overturn elections and to distort the nature of democracy.
Thanks so much. Dan from the Messenger, why don't you go?
Can you hear me?
You're on.
Great, thank you so much. I would love for the Congresswoman and whoever else wants to comment to just talk about the symbolism that this is happening in Georgia, a state that rejected Donald Trump in 2020. I think he was the first Republican to lose it in about 30 years, that his focus on stolen ballots and everything he said kind of sunk to Republican Senate candidates a few months later. He was unable to unseat many of the Republicans he wanted to unseat. I mean, it's a state that has over and over and over kind of proved to be, in many ways, his Achilles heel. So I would love for somebody to comment on the symbolism of this indictment coming from the state of Georgia.
I could start. I think it's very fitting. If you think back to the election night in 2020, I remember being up watching the news, and Georgia was too close to call. I remember doing press leading up to election night and people saying, oh, that's cute. They really think that they're going to flip the state of Georgia. Georgia is a red state. The conservatives are going to come out in force. But we knew what the people felt on the ground. We knew what was happening all around us. And we knew that Georgia voters wanted their voice to be heard. And they showed up and they showed out in numbers that no one anticipated. I also think about leading up to the runoff, because remember, we had not one, but 2 U.S. Senate seats on the ballot at the same time. And that night, I had just gotten sworn in as a new member of Congress on January 3rd, y'all, January 3rd. And then 2 days later, January 5th, was our runoff for those U.S. Senate seats. And I was up all night doing media because I was super excited that not only had we delivered the presidency for the first time in 28 years in Georgia, but now we were going to deliver not 1, but 2 U.S. Senate seats to change the makeup of the U.S. Senate. And then that morning, I show up at the state capitol on January 6th because I am there to defend our electoral college votes as an elector from the state of Georgia, the chairwoman of the Democratic Party, and the new congresswoman representing Atlanta in the seat that was held by the late Congressman John Lewis. My first order of business as a member of Congress was going to be speaking on the floor to defend our electoral college votes because Donald Trump had convened people in DC to come and stop the smooth and safe transfer of power in our country. And then we all saw what happened with the attack on the Capitol. So this is all so meaningful that then it comes back to Georgia once again to stand in the gap and stand up for our democracy, for accountability, holding people accountable so that people's voices are heard. It's not always comfortable or convenient to do the right thing, but that is exactly what is happening in Georgia. And I have every confidence in our district attorney that she will get that she will bring this throughout the process so that people will feel like justice was prevailed. Their voices can be heard when they show up to the ballot box, because what I don't want are voters to think about what happened down in Coffee County, where you have a president who seek to intervene with what was happening in Georgia. Each county has their independent board of elections. Everything is separate. There's no one way to do things. 159 counties, 159 individual boards of elections. And in Coffee County, we had an election official who was willing to not think about the law or what she was supposed to be doing, but work with someone who wanted to overturn our elections. So we're going to hold people accountable as we have always done in Georgia. Our voters are going to continue to make their voices heard, and we're going to continue to make sure that the country understands that the South has something to say.
All right, we're running up against the hour. We're going to take one more question before I jump over to that. Let me just say, if you have any follow-ups, you want to get a hold of any of the panelists, you can contact Emily Leach, Public Citizens Deputy Communication Director, ELEACH at citizen.org. She'll connect you with who you need. Final question is over to Mike from Truth Out. Go ahead, Mike.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm looking at an interesting poll today that basically shows Republican primary voters who pay attention to the news, had an easier time answering political literacy questions, are much more likely to see the indictments as legitimate and much more likely to be supporting DeSantis or Christie right now compared to Republicans who are not paying so much attention to the news. And I'm just kind of wondering, to take a step back, what would you all say to any voter, but also Republican voters who are hearing that this is just a witch hunt and they're stashing it away mentally and they're not totally processing it? I know we talked about the importance of cameras, but what would you all say to those voters? What would you say to a Republican who feels confused about this right now?
Anyone who wants to take that can go ahead. Why don't we start with you, Representative Williams? And we'll appreciate you spending the whole hour with us and let you bump after you finish.
This is not about any one political party, because I want Republican votes counted. I want Democratic votes counted. I want independent and non-affiliated votes counted. So anyone who is feeling a little confused or conflicted, who might be a Republican and are not quite sure where they fit in all of this, follow the facts. Listen to the facts in this case, and you will understand that there is no partisanship when it comes to truth and justice. And so we have to make sure that as we continue to follow out and go through this process, that we are listening to the facts of what happened leading up to the November election, the aftermath leading up to the counting of the Electoral College votes, and leading up to January 6th. Follow the facts and let that be your guide.
Any other panelists want to jump in?
And I think one of the reasons why these Republicans are taking the indictment seriously is because they see it as an electability issue. They might not think the indictments are a good thing, but they're worried about Trump losing in the general election. I mean, what would you say to them? Or is this? I mean, I know this isn't about partisanship, but
yeah, I think there's two ways to
be watching this case.
Sure. Well, there's two ways to look at it. One is, wow, what a weird coincidence that so many different prosecutors are indicting the person I intended to vote for.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could invert it and ask yourself, why am I intending to vote for somebody who keeps being indicted for criminal activity? And so I would encourage voters to invert the question and ask why they would continue to take such an enormous risk in supporting somebody who so many prosecutors, so yes, it's 4 indictments in 4 different jurisdictions, yes. But it's not just 4 prosecutors, it is grand juries, dozens of American citizens who've reviewed evidence, indicted them. What do they know that you as a voter don't? And why, with other seemingly qualified candidates, are you going to stick with the one who's going to spend much of next year in courtrooms?
Okay, thanks.
And I would also add to that, I think it's important for voters to ask themselves, what is more important, which political party wins one election, or our ability to continue holding free and fair elections as a democracy in the future, and count on the fact that no matter who we support, no matter what political party we belong to or vote for, that we know that our vote will be counted.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We're going to wrap up. Let me just remind you, if you need any follow-up, contact Emily Leach, leach@citizen.org. All of us are available to continue to dialogue with you about what goes on in the Georgia case, the other indictments relating to Donald Trump. And beyond that, as I think we're really trying to underscore the ongoing effort to protect our democracy, the freedom and right to vote, from a quite concerted and broad effort that it includes but expands far beyond Donald Trump to undermine it. None of us on this call have any intention of letting that effort succeed. And today's and yesterday's indictment is a step forward in protecting our democracy, establishing the rule of law, holding people accountable for their efforts to thwart the thing that enables us to have a government of, by, and for the people.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.